congratulations on the documentary. I've had a chance to sit down and watch it, and it's amazing. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm just going to change rooms because it's, saying that, not many people have already had a chance to see it. Obviously, we've had a couple of festivals, but it's good to get it out there finally.
Yeah. Do you get nervous when you've got a film coming out like this, or do you get excited that it's about to come out and people are going to be able to see it?
I'm probably more excited, I think, just because. I've never really felt nervous. I mean, this is a very complicated story to tell, and getting it right in the short amount of time and the volume of footage we had was the challenge. So I'm uncertain about how people will receive it, but I think it is a particular type of film.
Yeah.
It will be attracted. People will be attracted to a particular type of story, and the way it's told as well. So we've had the responses we have had been really emotional, which has been heartening. And that's kind of where we lent into that intimate perspective of the story. So I'm excited about getting out there.
So where did this journey begin for you? When did you first become involved with the film, and where did the idea originate from?
Well, I got a call from the producer, Gabriel Shipton, who's Julian's half-brother, in the middle of 2020. So, and he was had already been filming for almost a year by that point with his father, John, who's our main character. And it was the idea of the documentary was kind of formulating with him. There was somebody filming in London with John and Europe as well. And when I came on board, it was just on the cusp of the extradition hearing beginning in late 2020. And so our discussions very much revolved around, me going to London. I was on a plane within a month, and meeting John and the family all kind of coalesced around me arriving there. But we already had a year of footage, and my cinematographer, Niels, he had already kind of established a routine and an approach that just really suited me. It was that observational, it was very much just following the characters and understanding them through their press conferences, I guess, and a lot of interactions with other people. That's how we kind of proposed it. But it was also really revolved around trust. And in such a small group of people who obviously they had a court case going on and a very powerful adversary, it was a very crucial that we had that trust, and there also was reflected in the footage that we got. But it began with Niels, our cinematographer, who was able to establish that, and I kind of stepped into that routine. So I'm very thankful for him and what they'd already begun, and then I proceeded to probably film for another 5 months after that. And Niels continued on after that. So we're really dealing with over 2 years of footage when we started editing in early 2021.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had such a short period of time to get there, and of course it revolves around a court case, so you can't change anything as a filmmaker. So how did that change your approach to the project than how you would normally approach a film?
Yeah, look, it did change it, and we just had to adjust. There's not much you can do. It was how we were going to portray, I guess, those obstacles. Two of the main obstacles, obviously, were the court itself, because the court proceedings, I should say, are very technical. You can't get in there. It was in the middle of COVID, so it was already kind of challenging to kind of cover that. But court cases in general are I find them very uninteresting in a lot of ways, and then this one was so clouded in technicalities and complexity of historical events and the story itself. And then the other main challenge, I think, which gave a real shape to the film, was not having any access to fundamentally our main character in Julian, and him being in prison and inaccessible. What we lent into is this idea that we were going to explore him as a historic figure, but portray him, understand him as a man, understand him as an individual through the people that loved him. And the limited contact that we're able to have with him is really just reflected in those phone calls and other moments that we do see of him in archive. But it was really, he was out of reach. He's been silenced. And so it was really all of these people stepping into the public light, like John and Stella, and also other supporters of Julian's, who have really their lives have been changed, because, you had Julian, who had I guess a global platform, and now him being totally silenced. It was really looking at that story about him through those people. And that's kind of fascinated me, those challenges. So, yeah, very much shaped how we told the story, those restrictions.
What was it like being around his family during such an emotional time? Because I know as a filmmaker, you want to get the best interviews and the best shots, but you also have to be very aware in a situation like this that people are going through probably what will be the most emotional time of their lives. What was that like for you as a filmmaker, dealing with that fine line?
Oh, look, it's really challenging. You're right. It was a very emotional and difficult time for them. I mean, part of only one layer of it was that they were in the middle of a court case, and Stella was obviously on the legal team. So what she's able to say is very careful about her wording, even though we weren't airing the documentary for some months. It wouldn't be till after the court case was finished. It's still because of the power of their adversary and what's at stake for Julian. They have to be so careful. And then on top of that, they've had a decade of being surveilled by US intelligence and all these other issues that they've had to deal with in protecting their children as well. So all of those different layers, when a new person steps into that inner circle, as I felt I was, I just wanted to observe, and it was only in very select moments where I would ask a question, and even I knew that a lot of the time I wouldn't get the answer that I needed, which was often just a bit of clarity about what was going on. So in some ways, the film is born of that, I guess, that reticence or that reluctance to fully expose and present themselves, but it was because of the caution and the history that they had in dealing and trying to kind of save Julian as well. So I think a lot of the time I just wanted to shrink up and as you do when you're pointing a camera at someone and you just want to observe it, a lot of the time you just want to disappear, because that's when you get the best stuff. And I think when I look back at the footage, when we were just really most at our, gentle in the scene is when we got our best footage. So it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. And also sometimes you don't say anything because you know that later on you need to kind of broach a subject matter. But, John and I, we did those interviews in the kitchen, which play a large part of the structure of the film. We ended up doing about 13 hours in the kitchen over the period of the months that I was there. And they were, really challenging, because John would have to spend time with the press during the day, and then I wanted to press him for different subject matter, which I didn't hear in those press conferences. And, he's either exhausted or had enough of talking to a camera.
Yep.
And, he comes home and wants to sit and have a glass of wine and some cheese, and I'm sitting there in the kitchen kind of waiting for him. So there's a lot of different layers. But I think because of that, that back and forth between him and I is some of the most interesting I found, because getting to know him as an avenue to understand Julian and also understand the people that love and support Julian were really critical to telling the story.
Definitely. You mentioned there about surveillance and law enforcement agencies, and I know they are very, very strict with the whole Julian Assange case. Did you run into any issues with them at all during the shoot, or did they largely leave you alone?
No, I mean, this is part of the issue with the story, is that, more often than not, if an intelligence organisation is surveilling someone, you just don't know about it. And in Julian's case, the enemy, I would say, or the adversary is rarely reveals themselves. So what Julian's up against is kind of an invisible adversary.
Yeah. And
for storytelling wise, it's really difficult. We didn't have any kind of interactions or deeper understanding of that, and it was really only through publications that came out recently when I think 30 or 40 former or current intelligence people talked about Julian's surveillance while he was in the embassy and actually what was going on. And it's also the subject of a court case in Spain at the moment. So that was the only insight that we really had into what was going on behind the scenes, because most of the time it's just invisible.
Yeah.
and portraying that is really difficult. So I'm really kind of proud of the way that we structured those embassy moments, because there is a sense of dread and a sense of surveillance, and able to get all that surveillance footage just kind of enriched that understanding of what his time was like there, and the fact that he was falling in love and having children and all of that. It's just a very interesting time in his life, but also probably out of sight to a lot of people as their understanding of what was actually going on at the time.
Yeah. You mentioned how much footage had already been filmed before you came on board the project. What was that like as a filmmaker, going over all of that footage and, of course, all of the surveillance footage and everything of Julian? How did you decide what went into the documentary and what was left out? And how many hours did you spend in front of a screen watching all of that?
Well, I'm still continuing to watch it at the moment as we're kind of finalising some bits on the film. So the plan was to kind of look at it as a modular structure. So we had obviously the embassy moments, and we would break them down and look at them. The thread of following John and seeing the world through his interactions with the press and supporters and other allies was a premise. So anytime we had a moment where John was interacting with people, it kind of rose to the surface, and then we asked ourselves, what does it tell us about him, and how does it progress the story? So what came later was those interviews between him and I, which just gave us a spine through the story. But the best sequences really rose to the top, and that's something I really believe in, is that often you build a film around those moments. I mean, the CCTV footage out of the embassy was such a gift, and so we decided that we were going to create a story through Stella's interview for that sequence. But the moments between John and other people that we captured on the fly, we either knew on the day or over reviewing the footage, we were able to see that they just showed him as a person or progressed the story in a very interesting way, and we then shaped the film around those moments. It's almost like accommodated them, and I find that always happens on particularly observational kind of work, and that's ultimately what we wanted to present, just so it's a gentle journey and reflected the personality of John as much as we could within the style of the storytelling, and that way I felt like we got a deeper understanding of him without being so direct. And that was a challenge as well. I really liked.
Ben, you just mentioned that you're still going over footage. Is this going to be a film that keeps on evolving and gets released in different forms over the next few years at least?
Oh, I don't know. It's just one of those stories. That was one of the challenges, that we hoped the film would sit as itself, as a kind of time capsule of just a moment in time, but certainly not try to attempt to tell the whole story of WikiLeaks and Julian's journey, but just give you enough context to push the emotional structure of the film of John's journey, and so that hopefully they supported each other. But you're right. I mean, things are happening every week. Julian got married last week. Only 2 weeks before that, his appeal was denied. Late last year, he had a mini stroke. I mean, every few weeks there seems to be another revolution of this story that goes back more than a decade, and so that was part of the challenge. But I felt like what was the nicest wrap up is to kind of close the decade out with the Capitol riots and have the structure of the court case that we followed and the verdict of that as a kind of a closing moment, because I just felt like it was such a significant moment in history. The end of the Trump presidency, and all collided within 1 week of that verdict, Julian's verdict, coming out last year.
Yep.
So it gave us a nice climactic structure, but and I think everyone will remember it, obviously. So it just kind of presented itself, and it seemed to be quite neat. Makes sense. Definitely. But yeah, the story just goes on. I'm sure this footage will end up somewhere else, in a decade or so, turn up in some other version of the story, and maybe it'll be more comprehensive and begin with the launch of WikiLeaks, or maybe go back to Julian's childhood. Who knows? He's had quite a remarkable life and influence on certainly on journalism.
Definitely. Well, Ben, to wrap up, what would you like to say to people out there who are thinking about heading along to the cinema to check out this documentary?
Oh, look, if they have any interest in the WikiLeaks or Julian's story or the idea of, where contemporary journalism is going, I would think they would be interested in this story. But it really boils down to a father's campaign to save his son. And I think if we all ask ourselves if one of our family members was in a dangerous, critical situation or in jail overseas, what would we do and what could we do? And I think looking at John, he's a man in his late 70s, he embarks on this odyssey to save his son, and that in itself is a really fascinating journey to see a really unique man tackle those problems, and I think that in itself everyone can relate to.
Definitely. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us